Senator Obama, where do you come down on this question? How many troops are going to have to stay for how long?
I think Joe is right on the issue of how long this is going to take. This is not going to be a simple operation. I think Senator Clinton laid out some of the challenges that were out there. I agree with John Edwards that all of us on this stage, I think, would begin to bring this war to an end. I think we also can all agree that it's going to be messy, that there are no good options. There are only bad options and worse options. And we're going to have to exercise judgment in terms of how we execute this. But the thing I wish had happened was that all the people on this stage had asked these questions before they authorized us getting in. And I make that point. I make that point because earlier on we were talking about the issue of experience. Nobody had more experience than Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, and many of the people on this stage that authorized this war. And it indicates how we get into trouble when we engage in the sort of conventional thinking that has become the habit in Washington. Now, that judgment's going to have to be exercised moving forward. And I actually think that Joe's point about partition may be the right one. The only area I disagree with Joe on that is that it is important for the Iraqis to arrive at the conclusion that partition makes sense as opposed to it being imposed by the United States government. Because I think if that happens, if the perception is that we are carving up the country as opposed to the parties arriving at a decision, then that could antagonize some of the factions and actually make the problem
Senator
worse.
Obama, you've invoked the idea of conventional thinking a few times here, yet when I listen to what you're saying about what you would do in Iraq now, it sounds very similar to what Senator Clinton would do. Is there any difference between you and Senator Clinton on what you would do right now?
My sense is that what all of us need to do over the next 16 to 18 months is focus on putting pressure on Republicans to stop giving George Bush a blank check. Because if we have to wait for 16, 18 months, that's going to make the situation that much worse. If we have not begun a withdrawal by the time I'm sworn into office, then the next task is to call together the Joint Chiefs of Staff and to give them the mission, which is to begin a orderly, phased withdrawal so that we can begin the diplomacy that Joe and Bill and others are talking about. But look, as I said, there are no good options at this point. This is the equivalent of George Bush drove the bus into the ditch, and there are only so many ways you can pull that bus out of the ditch. That doesn't mean you don't fire the driver. And it doesn't mean that you don't evaluate how we avoid getting in these same problems in the future.
We can talk about George Bush driving the bus into a ditch, but let's not forget there was a Democratic Senate in charge that okayed the war. And those senators who are up on this stage helped to authorize that war, and they have to take responsibility for that. Likewise, they have to take responsibility for funding the war. You say you're opposed to it, but you keep funding it. I think the American people have to look at that and ask, what's going on? Now, I've had a plan on the table for 4 years to get out of Iraq. And Democrats in Congress have to stand up to the pledge they made in 2006 to take us out of that war. They have to tell the president now, bring the troops home. We're not going to give you any more money for that war. The American people have a right to expect that we're going to take a new direction. But frankly, you cannot expect a new direction with the same kind of thinking that took us into war in the first place. We cannot leave more troops there. We cannot privatize Iraq's oil. We cannot partition that country and expect there's going to be peace. We need a president who understands that, one who's been right from the start, and one who has shown the judgment, the wisdom, and the maturity to take the right stand at the time that it counted most, when the American people needed someone to stand up, and I'm the one who did that.
Let me move on now. We got a question. We got an email question from Seth Ford of South Jordan, Utah. And he said, my question is to understand each candidate's view of a personal God. Do they believe that through the power of prayer, disasters like Hurricane Katrina or the Minnesota bridge collapse could have been prevented or lessened? I'd like each of you to answer it. Let me start with you, Senator Clinton.
Well, as you know, it's hard to hear you up here, George. I apologize.
We'll keep it up, and I'll just repeat it again. My question is to understand each candidate's view of a personal God. Do they believe that through the power of prayer, disasters like Hurricane Katrina or the Minnesota bridge collapse could have been prevented or lessened?
Well, I don't pretend to understand the wisdom and the power of God. I do believe in prayer, and I have relied on prayer consistently throughout my life. You know, I like to say that If I'd not been a praying person before I got to the White House, after having been there for just a few days, I would have become one. So I am very dependent on my faith, and prayer is a big part of that.
Senator Dodd?
I agree with what Hillary has just said here. I would not want to try and second-guess the Lord's intentions here, and to assume that part of his great plan includes some of these actions we see here for a variety of different reasons here. And the power of prayer, I think, is important to all of us. I hope it is, recognizing that we don't do anything without his approval.
I have prayed most of my life, pray daily now. It's enormously important to me. But the answer to the question is no. I don't. I prayed before my 16-year-old son died. I prayed before Elizabeth was diagnosed with cancer. I think there are some things that are beyond our control, and I think it is enormously important to look to God, and in my case, Christ, for guidance and for wisdom. But I don't think you can prevent bad things from happening through prayer.
What I believe in is love, and love implements courage, and courage permits us all to apply the virtues that are important in life. And so you can pray. I was always persuaded by or struck by the fact that many people who pray are the ones who want to go to war, who want to kill fellow human beings. That disturbs me. I think what we need is more love between one human being and another human being, and then we'll find the courage to dispel many of the problems we have in governance. The answer to governance is not up here in the dais. The answer is with the American people and the people of Iowa. That's where the answer is. And I have a proposal, and it's the only one that talks of change. The change is to empower the American people with the national initiative. And my colleagues, with all due respect, don't even understand the principle of the people having the power.
I pray. I'm a Roman Catholic. My sense of social justice, I believe, comes from being a Roman Catholic. But in my judgment, prayer is personal. And how I pray and how any American prays for what reason is their own decision, and it should be respected. And so, in my view, I think it's important that we have faith, that we have values. But if I'm president, I'm not going to wear my religion on my sleeve and impose it on anybody.
George, my mom has an expression. She says that God sends no cross you're unable to bear. The time to pray is to pray whether or not, when you're told, as John was and I was, that my wife and daughter are dead, to have the courage to be able to bear the cross. The time to pray is to pray not only before, but pray that you have the courage. Pray that God can give you the strength to deal with what everyone is faced with in their life. Serious crosses to bear. The answer to the gentleman's question is no. All the prayer in the world will not stop a hurricane, but prayer will give you the courage to be able to respond to the devastation that's caused in your life and with others, to deal with the devastation.
I believe in the power of prayer, and part of what I believe in is that through prayer, not only can we strengthen ourselves in adversity, but that we can also find the empathy and the compassion and the will to deal with the problems that we do control. Most of the issues that we're debating here today are ones that we have the power to change. We don't have the power to prevent illness in all cases, but we do have the power to make sure that every child gets a regular checkup and isn't going to the emergency room for treatable illnesses like asthma. We may not have the power to prevent a hurricane, but we do have the power to make sure that the levees are properly reinforced and we've got a sound emergency plan. And so part of what I pray for is the strength and the wisdom to be able